All right, the Patrick Netherton Show, 11:30 The Tiger. He's Roger Sampson. I'm Patrick Netherton. Pleased to have you with us. And in between hits nationally and press conferences and Instagrams and everything else, we're proud to have a couple of minutes with Jane Slater of the NFL Network, who joins us now. Jane, how the heck are you? Are you surviving over there?
Well, it's been a different camp experience, that's for sure. Happy to be back to work. Obviously grateful for a job and excited that it definitely feels like we've got football and it's happening. But yeah, it has been a first couple of days, that's for sure.
Yeah, you mentioned that, and that's one of the things I'm not sure people really understand is, yes, the players are being tested frequently, all of that, but the media is having to go through a lot of this as well. Tell us kind of what they're doing in terms of protocols for you guys.
So it's interesting. Our protocols with the Cowboys do not include COVID testing as it relates to the nose swab, but that's also because we're not really allowed much in the building. In fact, I'm not in the building at all. We come in every morning. It is an early start. We have to be there by 7:30 at the absolute latest. Of course, McCarthy is having his press conference at 7:15 in the morning, which has been fun.
Yeah.
And then latest we can get there is 7:45. We get a temperature check. We have to go through like 6 questions on a questionnaire. And then we're allowed out at practice, but we are spread out pretty far apart. We're standing for 2 hours out in the morning heat. And I think probably the most frustrating part for a lot of us this year is they're attributing it to COVID and the fact that if there aren't fans there, well, then this is why we can't report what we're seeing. But we aren't allowed to report what a coach says. Like, I got in trouble the other day for just reporting that a coach said, quick arms, quick feet. Not kidding. We are not allowed to report personnel groups or who's working out the ones and twos. And I think that is what is very hard for a lot of us, is navigating, well, then what can we talk about? And that was certainly the case, of course, when you saw Gerald McCoy's injury at practice, which, there was like this brouhaha in Dallas that I somehow leaked this to Ian Rappaport, our insider. That was not the case. He got it from somebody clearly within the facility. But we are not even allowed to tweet that stuff until 10 o'clock in the morning when practice is over. So that has been very, very frustrating for a lot of us that can't report things that are happening in real time. But these are the COVID rules. And even as Mike McCarthy suggested this week, he hasn't really had the element of surprise or really an advantage, given that he's so behind the 8 ball, that this is his one element of surprise. A lot of people not knowing what they're doing. I mean, they have been so intense with what our cameras can shoot, what the team cameras can shoot. So it's very, very different than the Jason Garrett regime, where I actually did have coaches that would laugh to me about everything they needed to see was on video.
Yeah.
Which, to be fair, there wasn't a lot of competitive advantages to that.
Yeah, isn't it all a bunch of the secrecy among coaches? And I get this even at the Northwestern State level, where I will shoot video and they'll say, "Hey, make sure you're not getting any of our pre-snap movements and that stuff." I mean, come on. What are, like, everyone doesn't know what Mike McCarthy is going to do when he gets on the football field. Like, this is some huge trade secret. Isn't this just, I mean, what are we doing this for?
Great question.
Yeah, I know it's one you probably honestly can't answer, but still,
if this wasn't a COVID year, obviously I would find myself probably pushing back a lot harder, candidly. But I think a lot of us are just grateful to be working, to have access to training camp, and to be doing our job. So at this point, I think, and especially the fans, it's sort of, the fans sort of tune it out. Well, to the extent of, you guys sound like a bunch of whiny babies. I get that.
Yeah.
I just think what makes a lot of us good at our jobs is, one, being the eyes and ears and being able to make distinct observations from practice. That's what training camp's about for a reporter, and that's how you're good at your job. And then also for me specifically as a reporter, I haven't had much interaction with this new coaching staff, certainly not with the new players, and training camp is where you start building those relationships. We are going to have no forward-facing communication with any players, access to locker room, or even access to the field this year at all. All of our interviews are done on virtual Zoom, and it is every single reporter gets the same access. So,
do you worry that this might be something that lasts once COVID is over, that the coaches and the league love the idea of being able to control the flow of information so much that they don't go back to the way it used to be?
Speaking for myself, I have never been a fan of being in a male locker room for an hour as a component of my job. I loathe it. I've always thought we could be just as effective saying, all right, you can grab players as they're coming off the football field.
Mm-hmm.
This need to stand in the locker room while men are undressing and showering has driven me nuts.
Sure.
And I remember bringing it up at about 3 years ago, and there were a lot of beat reporters that were furious that I was even talking about it because, you know, admittedly, when Dak Prescott's talking, if you're a smart reporter, you're walking around and talking to that second-string linebacker or, you know, the second-string lineman, and you're developing relationships and you're getting information, so there's a value of it. But it has always seemed like a very odd component of my job that, you know, we're talking so much about workplace environment, and yet it's acceptable for me as a woman to have to stay in the locker room with, you know, naked men in order to news gather. It seems
right.
so antiquated, and it's fascinating to me that we've never covered that. Men certainly aren't allowed in women locker rooms.
Yeah.
And so, I would be surprised if we're ever going to be allowed in locker rooms, period. But I could see us being able to grab players coming off the field or doing things along those lines. In other words, I think there's going to be some marriage of the two, but they have certainly, in my opinion, taken advantage of COVID as a way to restrict the flow of information this year specifically. But I think they're going to have a really, really hard time with reporters moving forward, limiting access to players after, you know, the COVID threat passes.
Right. You can't limit them everywhere. I mean, you limit them.
It's a hard sell.
Yeah, limit them to the locker room, but you can't limit them everywhere. You got to be able to still have some face-to-face interaction at some point. Talking to Jane Slater from NFL Network. All right, so what is the news with the Cowboys? What are you gleaning from early on in training camp?
Well, just so impressed with CeeDee Lamb. And, you know, I think it's when you see a guy that fell to them at 17 and, you know, they already had Amari Cooper. And I've been talking about Michael Gallup since his rookie season. He's a kid that has just consistently tried to get better. And I know a lot of people, unfortunately, became familiar with Gallup because of his inability to haul in the touchdown against the Eagles last season.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he is just such a good kid. I mean, such a great kid. And I love that Mike McCarthy considers him not the number 2, but another number 1. And that's how he was viewed in Dallas, it was sort of 1A, 1B with him and Amari Cooper. But so you already have that. And then just CeeDee Lamb, he had a one-handed catch the very first day of practice. He's just so fluid and so sharp in his routes. And the fact that he can literally, Michael Irvin was talking about this, the reason why he's so different from other 88s is he can play all over the field. Most of those guys had a particular spot on the field. He can play inside, outside, on both sides. He's just this remarkable athlete, and he is not afraid of expectations. You know, a couple of years ago when they let Dez go, they were talking about wide receiver by committee because they couldn't get Sammy Watkins in here. And I was told the reason why Sammy Watkins turned down Dallas was because he didn't want the attention that came with the Cowboys and the expectations. And I think that's fair. There's a lot that comes with it when you come to Dallas. But CeeDee Lamb, coming in here as a rookie, talked about those expectations and, you know, talked about, you know, to paraphrase, how they actually make you better. And so I've been impressed with him. But I do think the Gerald McCoy thing was incredibly unfortunate, especially when you watch the video back how it happened, what a freak accident it was. Antoine Woods stepping on that foot during defensive line drill. You know, the good news is on the inside, they do have some options there. Neville Gallimore really impressed me. I did a podcast with him this summer. He came out of OU. We talked to Lincoln Riley about him, got some really great insight. Mike McCarthy seems impressed with him. And then Tristan Hill just really did not live up to expectations. A lot of people thought he was going to be a Taco Charlton 2.0. It sounds like, I don't know if it's just a new coaching staff or players challenged him this offseason, but the reports on Tristan Hill is at least that he is sort of coming around. They're a lot more positive than what they were last year. So he's an option for them there. And, of course, Tyrone Crawford's another guy that's played in the middle, so has some position flex for you and can play the 3 technique. A lot of people said, well, what about Snacks? Are they going to go out there and get him? He's not a 3 technique guy. So I think they're going to keep cultivating in-house. But I think they're going to be okay. It's just disappointing given how excited they were about Gerald McCoy. Probably the one thing you're going to miss the most is his leadership. But I think his note to Ed Werder and credit to my colleague at ESPN for getting that text message from McCoy talking about how disappointed he was, but that he really appreciated the fact that the Jones family opened up their doors and he was still committed to mentoring up the young kids. So I think that's good for the Cowboys.
I know you have to run, but I can't let you get away without asking you about the local kid, Dak Prescott. Seeing any sort of emotional hangover, anything regarding the contract situation from the offseason, or does he look like he's gotten past it and he's ready to roll?
Absolutely not. I mean, that's what I respect so much about Dak. And, of course, hot Louisiana kid.
Mm-hmm.
He speaks over and over and over about the fact he grew up watching the Cowboys, wanting to be a Cowboys player. And I think even more specifically, he spoke to the fact he became a quarterback because of his brother, who he lost this offseason, and, wanting to not only play for his mother, Peggy, who he lost to cancer, but now his brother. He plays for he doesn't play for the glory. Like he plays for so many other things.
Mm-hmm.
He's got such personal integrity. The way he carries himself is beyond his years, and Jerry Jones spoke to that in their introductory press conference. We see it as those who cover him. I am not worried about the hangover of that contract. In fact, I think a chip on the shoulder is good for the Cowboys and for him. I think they're going to end up having to pay him handsomely if he performs the way I think that I know him by now. Yes, of course, there's going to still a slight there, but he's also making $31.4 million next year. He only made $5 million in his first season.
Right. Yeah, and by the way, his brother Jace was a Northwestern State Demon. We actually knew Dak back when he was a little kid, when he was traveling and following his big brother around. So, yeah, it hit at our family pretty hard, much as it did Dak's as well. Jane, you're the best. Thank you so much for spending some time with us. We look forward to your reporting on NFL Network and having you back on here before too long.
No worries. Thanks for me on. Bye.
All right, Jane Slater.